Hey everyone, I hope you had a good lunch if that's your time zone, or if you're on a different time zone, maybe you enjoyed a nice lunch cocktail or whatever you had during that break. Thanks for coming back for my talk today. So during the talk, I'll try to, so I am watching the Zoom chat. If anyone wants to, at least that's how the students do it in my class, is they write comments or questions as I'm talking. I lost the Slack chat, so I won't see that until afterwards. But if you have any questions, feel free to just ask on Zoom, and I'll try to keep an eye on that chat and respond, especially if there's any technical issues. Definitely let me know through there. So I'm Adam Doupé. I'm a professor at Arizona State University. And today I'm going to talk about kind of phishing and kind of the culmination of a bunch of research projects that we've done on phishing to try to understand the kind of global picture of phishing. And what I really want to spark, especially since this is the workshop, is where we can go from here and kind of what other research directions we can do to try to stop this really significant problem with phishing. And so where it all begins, right? Web security, it begins back at the early days of the web. So this is the original web browser that Tim Berners-Lee wrote on the NeXT operating system when he was at CERN. If you haven't dug into that history before, I highly recommend it. It is actually beautiful in the way that the original vision for the web was that the websites would be editable through the browser as well as viewable. So the web had this notion from the beginning of being able to edit content, which I find really nice. And actually tying into the CTF, one of my first CTF challenges was actually found a buffer overflow in one of the original versions of the World Wide Web program. And that was the challenge, to exploit it on a NeXT OS. So we started from this kind of very humble beginnings in this first hypertext markup language system. And since I think it's fair to say the reason why we're here in this workshop is because this has spread everywhere, right? So the web is literally suffuses our lives. I mean, we're able to have a remote conference in the middle of a pandemic because of things like the internet and the web. Your phone, right? So a lot of the research is on mobile devices and phones, but really a lot of the phones would be almost useless if they didn't have the internet and the web on top of it in order to talk to remote web services, to have backend web programming. And so where I'm going to start this story off about phishing is back in the good old days of America Online. So AOL was an early internet service provider, if you're not aware of it. And they were very famous for giving out these discs for free, getting free dial-up internet. And these were back in the good old days of dial-up. So what was that initial web like? And here, the time frame we're talking about is like 94 to 95. And so if you logging into AOL, it would actually dial in over a modem. I tried to practice for this talk the modem sounds, but I really couldn't get it right. And so maybe if somebody wants to throw a YouTube link to the dial-up sounds, you can feel that burst of nostalgia while you're sitting there. So as a user, you dial into America Online and you'd be given, let's say, AOL's version of the web. And so this is one of an early screenshot of an early AOL chat room. You could chat with people, you could send email, and it was really kind of a first iteration of the web. And it had a lot of walled garden problems where a lot of this stuff was inside AOL. But for a lot of people at the beginning, AOL was the web. Unfortunately, it wasn't this beautiful, idyllic situation. Very soon after the web and people started getting connected together, we started having essentially what I think of as con artists, and what eventually was what we think of now as social engineering, right? So people who would try to trick and deceive other users on these systems in order to try to get some gain for themselves. And one of the really, really fun papers to read if you want to take a stroll down memory lane and learn some of these early history is there's a paper written by one of the early phishers called Early Phishing. And if you look, their archive preprint is on the bottom here. And so he documented how you would go about stealing credentials on AOL. So, and they would do this all by hand. So he kind of talks about this underground hacking form of users on AOL who banded together and learned how to kind of break the system. And were these con artists on there. So the first, what they would do is create some kind of anonymous account, maybe with those free discs we saw. So they would get access to America Online. They would create an official looking screen name. One of the beautiful things in this paper is the author even mentions this problem of course, America Online realized this. So for instance, if you wanted to make a screen name called Billing Department, this is something that AOL would block because it's clear you're trying to trick people into presenting yourself as the billing department. So what would they do to get around this? Well, just like they do now, they'd use confusion attacks, and they would create a screen name called billing department with the 2 L's as uppercase I's. So it would look to be billing department. And this is back in 94, 95 when this was happening. They've already figured out these kind of classic tricks that still persist to this day in DNS and all kinds of other areas. So you first create an official screen name that makes you look like you actually work for AOL. Then you form some kind of bait message. So we'll see an example of this in a second, but you would get a message and that says, hey, this is AOL's billing department. We have a problem with your account. We need to verify that you actually own this account. So please give us your username and password, and then we can help you out with this problem. Then with that message, what they do, and then this is where you again get into the social engineering aspect of these con artists targeting very specific demographics. So they would go to a new member chat room, and this is a chat room where all new AOL members. So literally, it's kind of crazy to think about, but put yourself back in the mindset of you are on the internet for the first time. You've just gotten AOL, you log in for the very first time, you see join a new member room. And then the next thing that happens within 5 minutes of joining this new member room, you get a private message with this bait saying, hey, this is the billing department, there's a problem. And you've never been exposed in your life to any of these kinds of scams or anything. So they would very frequently, people would fall victim to this literally minutes from getting their first access to the internet and the early web. And as a scammer here, you would keep doing this process to all the new members in the room until you were finally disconnected by AOL. And at that point, you'd start back at 1 because now you have a set of AOL username passwords that you could use to log back into the system to get more. They upped their game to steal credit card numbers too, even at this early stage. And so the very funny thing is, well, how did AOL detect them? Did they have very sophisticated algorithms? And oftentimes it was no. What happened was an AOL employee happened to be in one of these rooms, and they would get messaged and get scammed, and that AOL employee would then block their account. So that was the main way they said that AOL was able to find these scams. And again, this is all from the perspective of the early phishers. This actually led to the creation of a program called AOHEL. So the hackers who started doing this manually basically kind of came together and developed software to automate phishing is one part of it, but also other aspects of doing things on AOL. And this kind of led to a revolution in hacking. And this is kind of one of the very first and original phishing kits, which is basically software that a quote unquote script kiddie in hacker lingo, or somebody who isn't a sophisticated hacker, but wants to scam people out of their username, passwords, or their credentials, can use this piece of software in order to go after people. And this actually, the author here of this paper claims that they were the first one to come up with the term phishing in this paper, and specifically in this software. So that's kind of why I'm talking about it, to bring us through some of the history or some of the early days, which I find fascinating. And so part of what this AOHEL's screen had was a screen to phish for either passwords or credit cards, so we can see that you can check between them. You can have custom phrases, and you can change and alter the text of what you're going to send. And this was pretty sophisticated. So this is a real blast from the past. This is this program running on Windows 3.1 and AOL 1.1. And what's beautiful and what I love about this picture is it has all of the key components of phishing and why it's such a problem today are present here in this diagram. So what do you need? Well, you first need a list of targets, right? You need a list of people in order to target. And an AOL, they would do this by joining a new member chat room, and they would get a list of people who are brand new to AOL, and the software would automatically send the message to all those people. So you have to have, you need some kind of list of people. Nowadays, that can take the form of an email list. So hackers will get email lists of people that they will send the message to through email. You could also think of social media, any other types of things, but you need some kind of list of targets, like who am I going to target with this scam? And another important thing here, a lot of especially early phishing and even modern phishing depends on volume, right? So not everyone is going to fall for your scam. So you need to increase the volume of sending this scam to as many people as possible to try to trick and capture that information that you're looking for. And in the early days, they were not really using this for monetization necessarily. It was, about getting free AOL, and they're definitely, and to give you a little perspective, if you think of how much your internet service costs now versus then. So they mentioned in the paper that at the time, an hour of AOL was worth $3.50 in, I believe it was 95, which in today's dollars is something around six something an hour for internet access. So, they're not causing zero harm, but it's not at the, let's say the scams on the internet haven't reached the monetization scale that they're at now, where it's a lot of organized crimes and other types of things. So anyways, back to the things that we need here. So we need this list of targets. We also need what's now known as a lure, right? So in phishing terms, we need something that's going to hook the target and trick them into revealing sensitive information, right? So in this case, we're pretending to be AOL. So everything has to support, and that's why I like the notion of thinking about this in terms of con artists, and even in the popular culture representations in Ocean 11 or whatever is your favorite con artist movie, right? You're pretending to be somebody else so that the victim or the target thinks that you're coming from a position of authority. So here, these messages are trying to say that, hey, we need you to, and actually the beautiful thing here is there's even instructions, right? Because you're targeting people who've maybe never used the internet before. This is their first time using AOL. So it's telling you, we need you to hit the respond button and reply back with your current password, right? So in the lure itself, it's telling you how to interact with it. I guess there's some nice corollaries now with people saying that some of the best Bitcoin documentation of how to buy and sell and send Bitcoin come from ransomware, right? Because they need to educate people on how to use that software, and unsophisticated people. So the lure, so in any phishing operation, you need a list of targets, and you need some kind of lure that's going to trick them into giving their information up. And then you send out a bunch of these lures to a bunch of victims, and you may get some reply back from a target. And the beautiful thing here is then automation. So with automation, you can do this manually one at a time, but with automation, you can automate this whole process and collect all of these messages. And that's where this AOL software came in, is it would automate this whole process. It would even stop these replies from coming up and clogging up your screen. And it essentially automated it. They said you could do, there'd be about 20 something people in a single member room, and you could do about roughly 10 rooms before you got disconnected within 5 minutes. So at that point, you're sending your scams to about 200 people, and you likely have scammed a couple of them. So all this stuff still exists today. We have a list of targets. We have lures where we're sending the victims some kind of thing to get them to do some action. And we have automation. These are all the components we have in modern scams. So now, fast forwarding a lot from the AOL days. So here's an example of kind of a more modern scam. So on the left side of the screen would be a lure, so an email or some other message that somebody got on their phone or something that says, and this is, like American Express saying, hey, we have an important notification for you. We've restricted your access because of suspicious activity. And of course, you click on that button, it sends you to a screen that looks exactly like the American Express login page. Again, part of pretending to be that trusted authority. where when the user puts in their username password, it's not going to American Express, it's going to the phisher. And at that point, now not just stealing $3.50 an hour AOL access, but this is actually could have serious financial consequences for the victim, right? With this account information, the victim could transfer money from there. They could try to identify the credit card numbers and make credit cards, all kinds of nasty stuff in today's modern landscape. And one of the things, that kind of motivated us to look into this research is, this is results from Google's Safe Browsing Transparency Report. They've since dropped the web-based malware, so this is why the numbers start in 2019. But kind of you can see over time, this is from 2007 to 2019, phishing has significantly been on the rise, especially compared to web-based malware like drive-by download. So I think it's, in some sense, it's heartening, right? We should look back on our history of web security and say, you know what, we did a lot to make browsers more secure. We finally mostly killed Flash. And so, attackers less and less are relying on mass drive-by download or web-based malware. But that doesn't mean that users are ultimately protected when using the web. And really, that's what we should be concerned about, right? How can we make sure that people are safe browsing the web? How do we protect those users? And so we've seen this rise in phishing over time. And so this is so that's a weekly total on the upper left, and the lower right is the kind of the Google Safe Browsing Transparency Report of phishing sites on a more cumulative basis. So we can see that phishing is just really becoming a significant problem. And if you dig into it more, I didn't go into all the statistics, but you can pull up all kinds of stats about how much end users are suffering from phishing. And so it's one of those things that I think as a security community, we need to be aware of what is really impacting and affecting end users the most, and how can we address those issues. And it's almost tempting to kind of ignore phishing, especially because it's been around for so long, right? That original AOL phishing software was released in 1995. And so it's been over 20 plus years of phishing and other types of web-based scams. And so, we do research in it. Like I haven't been active in academia for as long as some of the great people on this call, but even I've seen the cycles of, you have a new hot topic, it becomes a hot topic, and then it kind of dies down and everybody moves on to the next hot topic. At the same time we're doing that. So phishing was, really active kind of early mid 2000s, and then it kind of dipped down and we went into other areas as a community, but the users are still here left dealing with this scourge of phishing. And I guess users, and also of course industry is involved there as well, and we'll get into their roles in a second. So this kind of so we wanted to try to understand this problem of, why does phishing continue at this scale? Why are we dealing with it? Didn't we kind of solve that problem? Like once we, got Google Safe Browsing and we got block lists into browsers, didn't that kind of solve the problem? And specifically, so it's clear that it is happening. So what are the shortcomings within the anti-phishing ecosystems? And we'll talk about how the anti-phishing ecosystems work in a second to try to understand that. Can we measure the effectiveness of the anti-phishing ecosystem so that we can identify areas, essentially vulnerabilities in our anti-phishing ecosystems, so that we can improve them going forward? So I'm going to talk about a couple of research papers that we've done in this area. And of course, it's all been done by the students, right? So I'm just the professor up here talking about a bunch of really awesome students' work. So feel free to reach out to them and talk to them about all the cool stuff they've done. So what we very first did was, in a paper that was published in eCrime back in 2018, was tried to study current phishing, how current phishing works, as well as understanding the anti-phishing ecosystem. So we have, just in the same diagram, we have the exact same components that were in that AOL example. We have phishers. They use some kind of messaging platform, usually email is what we think about, but all kinds of ways to send lures to phishing victims that trick the victims into visiting some phishing content in the form of a web page that shows a web page that has a login form that's similar or identical to the target organization. And the other important thing to realize here is that like the victims, of course, also are suffering from phishing, right? They're the ones getting their username password stolen. They're the ones getting credit cards stolen, maybe social security numbers. But there's also the organizations that are targeted by phishing, have to deal with these lost credentials and have to deal with fraud in their systems that result from it. But they're also suffering from the impact on their brand and other aspects. So we kind of think about that as the collateral damage that phishers are making because they're impersonating these high valued organizations, or maybe not high value, but impersonating these organizations. And why are phishers doing this now? Well, it's not for the lulz anymore, and it's not for free internet through AOL. It's for money. So the phishers are phish these credentials. They phish actually all kinds of things, which we'll probably touch on a bit, and then sell them to other hackers on the underground economy. I mean, the beautiful thing beautiful, I guess, from your perspective, right? So from this economy that sprouted up of criminals specializing in different areas in order to just sell their thing. So rather than saying, okay, I've got an American Express username password, now I have to turn that into actual money. As a phisher, I can sell that username password to somebody else who is responsible for turning that into money. And it's kind of important from an economic perspective to understand how this system works, to see what kind of things we can tweak to try to fix things. But it's not all bad, right? So there are anti-abuse entities that are involved here. So what we did is try to understand in the first step, the hosting platforms and the domain registrars that host these phishing kits. So we worked with the APWG, the Anti-Phishing Working Group, and got access to about 172,000 phishing URLs. And in addition, we also were able to access about 1,800 phishing kits. So this was the actual server-side source code of phishing kits that allowed us to see what phishers were doing. And what we were specifically interested in is what the phishers were doing, because they're not just operating in this lawless, wild, wild west AOL scenario. There's people whose job it is and who are actively looking for phishing attacks so that they can be blocked. And the phishers know this, right? So this is this beautiful cat and mouse game that happens over time. And what we're trying to look at here, so htaccess files are a file that sets up a web server basically and has directives like, if the request is coming from this IP address, which I know belongs to, let's say, Google Safe Browsing, then redirect them to a 404 page and pretend like this page doesn't exist. And what we found here is that these were very heavily used to block security organizations. And sometimes the phishing kits would even have comments about what organizations they were trying to block. And so in total, we saw about 1.5 million different directives, 340,000 of which were unique. And so we were able to kind of look at them. And from this work, this basically tried to understand, okay, why are they doing this? What kind of things are they blocking? Do they actually understand what they're blocking? And so a key thing then to realize of what the ecosystem came up with was this notion of anti-phishing block lists. So this is things like Google Safe Browsing, where basically when once Google knows that a domain or a specific web page is a known phishing site, in order to protect users, that gets added to a block list that gets distributed to all Chrome browsers. And that way, when a user sees this, they see this very scary warning, a related cousin to those scary warnings that Emily talked about this morning. In this case, I think the specifics have changed, but the goal here is this is a way that the ecosystem has reacted to this this threat of phishing. And so it's on by default in a lot of major desktops and mobile browsers. So you're getting the same protection no matter what device you're on or should be. And so the goal here is they want to detect phishing detection, and while also having a low false positive rate. So imagine you're running a business and you go to your site and you see this, that nobody can access your site because Google thinks you're a phishing website. That would significantly impact your business. And a lot of these have automated crawler backends that are crawling the web looking for these kinds of looking for indications of phishing. And when they find that, they add that to the block list and distribute it out. And so this gets into why the phishers are doing server-side cloaking, where cloaking is this process of switching based on what you see. And so basically when a victim visits this phishing website, they actually see the phishing content. So they see the login page. Whereas when security organizations see it, they go to the deny page. And so this is something that we saw and observed in these server-side cloaking. So it's, we know it's happening, but now we have evidence that it does. And the whole goal is to try to block this part of the ecosystem. So oftentimes, and the important thing I want to bring up here is, it's not just Google that's out there looking for phishing websites in order to block them, right? I think Google does that and does a great job. But it's also other companies. Like if you're an organization that's targeted by phishing, you're also proactively looking out there for things that are impersonating your brand and directly harming your users. And what do you do when that happens? Well, you report it to the anti-phishing entity, who then goes, checks it, see if it's classified as phishing. Great, then it adds it to the block list. And the goal of the phishers is to try to prevent that last phase. So try to prevent being blocked as long as possible so that they can maximize their return on investment. And it's a very clear kind of economic model here. And so then this kind of initial research and this initial look into the ecosystem said, okay, but how can these current anti-phishing systems bypass cloaking? How does cloaking actually affect this? Are these phishers using server-side cloaking because it's like a magic incantation that they don't actually know if it works or not? They just, keep adding it to their htaccess file over and over again until it's just full of entries, and some of which actually mean something and some of which don't. And so that brought us to our next project of thinking, okay, how do we measure phish? Right. Well, if you look, there actually is a way to measure phish. I didn't realize this, but apparently when people talk about phish, it's from the mouth closed, tail fin compressed to determine total length, in case you're ever wondering how to measure phish. But we're interested in measuring actual phishing. And so this led us to creating the Fish Farm project and the Fish Farm framework, which I'll talk about here. So do the browsers actually protect users from cloaked phishing? And we looked at two different categories. We wanted to answer coverage. So does a phishing site always get blacklisted? And specifically, we looked at speed. So we wanted to understand how long did it take before a phishing site got on the browser's block list. And so this is, and also consistency, right? Are people protected across all platforms? That would be, if Mac users were not protected, that would be not something that was great. And specifically, what are the implications of any gaps that we're able to find here? And so, just a second, I'll grab some water. And so we looked at several different lists. So we looked at Smart Screen, which is used by, I guess, Edge now, but also Internet Explorer at the time, and Google Safe Browsing, which is used by basically Chrome, Safari, and Firefox. So you can see Google Safe Browsing has the massive market share, 63% on mobile and 68% on desktops. And so what we did is we created this Fish Farm framework to actually pretend to be phishing sites ourselves. So this is how we're able to control and try to understand, okay, which phishing, how long does it take to detect these kinds of things? So we created the Fish Farm framework to be able to spin up a bunch of harmless phishing sites. So phishing sites that looked like an organization. In this case, we actually worked with PayPal to get their permission to create these sites that impersonated them, that looked like a real phishing site. But if you put in your email, username, and password, nothing would actually happen. We ran some initial experiments to try to guide the design of our bigger ones. Because as we'll get into, we tried different types of cloaking. So we made many different phishing sites, put them into different groups to try to understand the effect here. So the first group was the control group, just allow everything. The second group was only mobile. So the cloaking, server-side cloaking only allowed access from mobile devices, I believe using the user agent, but of course, Adam Ost can correct me if I'm wrong there. That's why it's always nice having the first author here in the audience. And we had another control group that looked at geolocation. So It would allow only people from US on desktop and only allow people not in the US on desktop. We used our first project and extracted all those IP host names from the htaccess file to create an anti-crawler group. And the last one was testing if JavaScript would run in the browser. So we would do client-side cloaking only if there was JavaScript there. So we ran these full experiments in July 2018. Each of these categories A through F had 66 sites in them. I really hope that math checks up. And then what we would do is report those sites to different phishing reporting places. So Google, Microsoft, APWG, Fish Tank, and through PayPal's internal reporting. The other thing we did here is used random.com domain names so that the sites wouldn't be biased if a website had the name PayPal in the domain name or in the URL. And this allows us to try to remove any confounding effects. So the basic procedure, and the nice thing is this fish farm framework actually manages all of this. So through 1 hour of setup, end-to-end automation, we configured and deployed these phishing sites, reported them, and then had a continuous monitoring of the block list to understand when a site was blocked. So from our experiments, basically over 2 million web hits, basically, so cloaking halved the chance that a site ended up on a block list, and it doubled the time that it took to be blocked. So this was a very big indication that cloaking actually is successful for phishers to employ. And of course, one of the key assumptions here of any research that this is representative of the ecosystem. And so one of the very shocking findings that I like talking about here was that mobile only sites were never blocked anywhere. So there was no warnings on mobile devices. And US only sites were not blocked by Google Safe Browsing, and non-US sites were never blocked by other ones. And so we actually disclosed this information so that we were able to and we worked with the organizations to get mobile block listing fixed in Chrome, Safari, Firefox. This is actually a very ripe area for research if people are looking for research directions. What's an efficient, effective way to do mobile block listing on mobile devices? There's key resource constraint differences between desktop environments and mobile devices, and that was one reason we've found for some of these problems on mobile. So to wrap up the discussion about Fish Farm, the framework is available. It's not publicly released, but it's available. We're happy to work with people who want to use that. And we're actually, so Adam Ost, the lead author of all this work, is transitioning the Fish Farm framework to the APWG so that it will be, the goal is to run it on every, what did you say, Adam? On every phishing site that gets submitted to the APWG? So,
yeah, that's right. Every URL that they receive from whoever.
Cool. Yeah, so our goal is to then help the ecosystem here detect these potential problems. And one of the and really the outcome of this was that mitigations really were not fast enough to prevent abuse, even though we've built up this beautiful, nice ecosystem where we detect something, and once it's detected, it gets distributed to blacklists and to browsers. That is not fast enough to prevent abuse, and we know that it's a fact, right? Because abuse is still happening even with these systems. And so that led us to our next project, which was we presented at Usenix 2020, was we wanted to understand the actual victimization. And one of the things, it's one of these, what I really like about this project is it starts with this very simple, very beautiful idea that's at the core of the web. And a key observation from looking at phishing kits is a lot of phishing kits actually embed the first party either JavaScript code or images. So think, and this makes sense, right? You're a phisher, you want to impersonate, let's say PayPal.com. Why would I want to host and waste bandwidth on the PayPal logo? Why don't I just point it to the direct PayPal logo? That way, if they ever change their logo, my phishing site still works, right? It seems like a very easy kind of engineering performance trade-off to make. The nice thing is if you're PayPal or you're this organization, we all know because of the way that the web works, requests to that page will have the referring URL, and that will in the header, and that'll tell us where that page came from. So it turns out by analyzing your own logs and saying, okay, who's including, let's say, logos or JavaScript tracking code, you can actually identify domains that are not affiliated with you and are highly likely to be phishing. And we actually built that into an analysis system in order for an organization to understand what type of phishing they're seeing and what types of threats there are. The other very nice thing, based on the nature of the web, is these requests, if the user is logged in already to the service, when they visit that, when their browser makes a request to, let's say, the logo, they will often include the session cookies. So we're actually able to link that up, this request, to what user made that request. And so our framework basically takes the anonymized web events, identifies known phishing or suspicious URLs, and is able to create a timeline of the attack. And then when we mixed this with the fish farm style approach of looking at the block lists, we can actually identify based on how effective a phishing is, depending on and how it goes over time of when it's what's the word I'm looking for, of when it's detected. There we go. And particularly because we get that session information, we can actually then tie those events back and say who was likely a victim of this, because eventually we saw fraud with that account who we know visited a phishing site on this date. And we also were then able to look back and look for phishing URLs. We were able to see any emails that we had access to that had that phishing lure in it. And so all of that allows us to get this timeline of when, and one of the beautiful things is this phishing website configured. So often, and I'll show it on the next graph, but we would see a few hits to the logo from a certain URL a week or two before that phishing site was actually released, which we can tell based on the traffic. And so we could see that it's very likely that that's actually the phisher testing their own website setup, right? So I think that's fascinating to be able to see when it's first configured. Then we can see when the attack distribution first begins based on emails that we get. Finally, the victims will visit the phishing website. Then there's this time when they visit to when it's being monetized, which we can tell based on the fraud data that we have in collaboration with the organization. And finally, we're able to then, by looking at the block listing, when is it mitigated and when is the site finally taken offline and no longer used? So this is what we call our golden hour data set. So just like photography, there's that golden hour where people are more likely to be phished. So let's look at the table. So this is all the data that we have. I mean, of course, all the details are in the paper. So this graph is all the phishing things that we've identified relative to when they were detected. So 0 on this axis is when it was detected. So it was first identified as malicious. And then to each side, so we can see the average B here all the way on the left is the first non-victim visit, which occurred on average 9 hours, but we can see there's kind of a long tail back there. So there's some hits still before detection. Then we can see on average when the first email was sent, how long it took the first victim to visit, when our first crawler visited us, because we also get information about user agents and everything that visits us, so we can see and that are also fetching that image. And we get 5 hours before it's ever detected, about 25% of victims actually visit the site. And the crazy thing is that 40 minutes before it's detected, already 50% of the victims have already visited the site and likely potentially fell victim to that scam. So that's what we think of as these golden hours are from when it's released to when it's blocked. That is the time where the phishers get a ton of their attacks. Now, the other sad thing is that there is still victimization happening after the 0th hour, right? After it's been detected. So this is something that we could definitely work with as a community to say, how do we make sure that once we've detected something as malicious, we really do make sure that everyone's protected from that. And 8 hours after it's been detected, 90% of the victims have already visited on average. And then the other thing I like to take away from this graph is thinking about, okay, how can we do better about when a phishing site is launched and when it's detected? So how do we close those gaps to try to prevent people from falling victim to phishing? Okay, oh, those are all the things. Cool. Yep. And the other really interesting thing from looking at this, we could look at campaigns. So we looked, and the basic takeaway here is that there's a lot of really sophisticated top phishing campaigns that are responsible for not necessarily the most phishing attacks, but the most victim traffic. So the more number of people that actually visit the site. So there's an indication that there are highly sophisticated people out there running these phishing sites, and they're deliberately taking advantages of weaknesses in the anti-phishing ecosystem. Okay, cool. Wow. I guess I can talk for a long time. So I will briefly summarize in 5 minutes the rest so we can have enough time. If you're not aware, we're in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic. I don't think that's news to anyone. It is also not news to the scammers. So we saw right away the scammers using the coronavirus pandemic in their scams. And this paper was at eCrime in 2020. So we collect a variety of sources to try to identify, from news articles that talked about phishing scams, DNS records and DNS registrations of domains that looked to be taking advantage of the coronavirus. We crawled the source codes of sites. We used the golden hour to check on users visiting phishing sites. And what I really like about here is so we've overlaid here, and it maybe seems like I don't know, a lifetime ago, but we had right about when this March 11th was when the WHO declared that the COVID-19 outbreak an actual pandemic. And we can see that the number of corona-related domain names significantly increased after there. And of course, there are, this is kind of to be expected, but this is also highly correlated with an increase in coronavirus-related scams. Okay, the next thing I want to take a look at is the types of scams themselves. So we looked at 50,000 scam and phishing websites and tried to identify ones that were related to coronavirus. So, and I think this probably makes me more mad than any of the other phishing stuff I've talked about, but I think it's important to understand what the attackers are doing. So part of it is donation themed, so fake donation sites to take advantage of people's goodwill and wanting help. Fake PPE sales, so fake websites where you can buy PPE and they just will either never send it to you or send you garbage. Coronavirus related events. So here's an IRS COVID-19 income benefit return. And then shopping websites. So here's a fake shopping website that says free shipping on all orders. And then this is what's key here is they're saying to again seem realistic, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we are currently facing a slight delay to ship orders, right? So it's a fake website. They're not actually going to ship you anything, but they're going to get you to not think that it's a scam and that they're not shipping you your things because they're blaming it on the coronavirus. So I think that was kind of a quick study we did looking at, and basically the takeaways here are that attackers are quick to shift to the latest news stories, right? So the coronavirus is just one example of this. Other things that happen are that can happen, or any other large events. Phishers will try to take advantage of interest in an event and target their lures to that event. What this means for us as an ecosystem and why this is important, how can we adapt? Can we be proactive? Do we always need to be reactive and wait and look and say, oh, it looks like they're trying to use the coronavirus pandemic to scam people? Can we actually be more proactive in doing so? And the final thing I wanted to talk about is a paper that's going to be presented at Oakland in 2021. The paper's up already. So I don't want to steal too much of Pengui's thunder, our student. So I just want to talk about some cool. So what this actually came out of the fish farm research, and the last group that looked at client side execution. So can the client execute JavaScript? So what we tried to investigate is said, okay, how prevalent is this client side cloaking, right? How prevalent is it in phishing, and can we detect it? So one of the crazy things we found is there's a phishing site that looks blank, right? And I don't know if you're like me, but when you're browsing the web, I kind of instinctively move around my mouse cursor. And this phishing site will actually wait until you move your mouse and then show you the phishing content. So it simultaneously takes advantage of the crawler's inability to move the mouse and a human's maybe natural tendency to either move it when something isn't working or whatever. And this is a way that they detect between an anti-phishing ecosystem and a victim. So we built a system to try to collect this data. We crawled a bunch of phishing sites. We looked at the client side, HTML and JavaScript. The other cool thing we did was we built on a paper from 2017 WWW called JForce, which does forced execution of JavaScript. So we essentially take the content, make the JavaScript go down all possible paths, get screenshots of all of those, and try to see if that matches any phishing content. And so we ran this for a while, and cool, some key takeaways there. So it seems that, and this is using data from APWG that we were able to get, we see that cloaked phishing is increasing over time. So the percentage of websites, of phishing websites in our data set that use JavaScript cloaking has increased over time, which I think is kind of interesting. It indicates that things are getting more and more sophisticated. This is one of my favorite examples of what they're actually doing. So here's a website. When you go to it, it's a phishing website. It doesn't look like a phishing website. In the upper right, it says, press allow to verify that you are not a robot, right? What does that sound like? It sounds like a CAPTCHA, right? We've been trained as users of the web to expect and experience a CAPTCHA. And so there's that handy arrow on the left that points you. What this browser is doing is the page is requesting to show notifications on your screen. And so you click allow, and when you do, if you click allow, it shows you the phishing content. If you don't click, so it's actually the phishers have put you in a lose-lose situation, because if you click allow, not only are you visiting this, seeing this phishing content and potentially falling victim to that, they're also popping up alerts now on your machine. And the reason why they do this is modern headless browsers and is what the anti-phishing system crawlers use, won't allow you to click this allow. They don't allow that functionality. So they've identified, essentially building on a lot, maybe building on or weaponizing a lot of the fingerprinting research of fingerprinting what is a real browser, a real user browser versus a anti-abuse browser. And they do it in such a way that is weaponizing CAPTCHAs. So it's preying on our ability to be presented and prove that we're human all the time, which they're expected to do. And then when they do that, they do it in such a way that the current automated systems can't do, but that if they do it, not only do they get phished, they also get a lot of annoying pop-ups and alerts, which is just infuriating. So, now that I've kind of talked about a lot of different areas, so go to, shout out, go to Oakland 2021, go to Pengui's talk for all the details there. And so hopefully I've given you kind of an overview of the history of phishing and some different measurement and detection studies we've done on phishing to understand it. And so I think where I want to leave us with is, where do we go from here? So I think it's important to think about, as a community, how can we just extend detection and mitigation beyond phishing? So, excuse me. Phishing is one type of, let's say, social engineering that occurs on the web, but there's other types too. We've seen in our coronavirus that there's scams that are defrauding people. But we shouldn't ignore phishing. We should actually be digging deeper into phishing. And I actually strongly believe that there should be more people looking at this problem of phishing. It's really impacting users, and there's really advanced phishing out there. This advanced JavaScript-based web phishing, I think, is fascinating, and there's definitely a lot of room there. Other ways are other types of phishing venues. So, email and web is just one. We're seeing a ton of SMS, voice phishing, chat services like WhatsApp and all that fun stuff. We should also be thinking about prevention, right? How can we prevent people from falling victim to this? And I think the important thing to think about here is it's not just technical, right? We as researchers, especially as computer science researchers, a lot of us, we always think about the technical problems, but we should be thinking about users as well and the psychology of users. And are there ways that we can try to remove the incentives of the benefit of phishing? Is there some way we can move beyond simple usernames and passwords that allow somebody to just easily steal it from you? That would be kind of thinking about that model of how phishing works and trying to remove the incentive to phish. Education is a huge issue. I don't think I can definitely say probably everyone here who is at an organization has gone through cybersecurity training that involves some kind of anti-phishing education. I don't think we've reached the pinnacle of anti-phishing education. I also don't necessarily believe that actual phishing campaigns that try to trick their own employees is the answer. I think it's an interesting part of education, but I think this is an area that's ripe for analysis and more research. So before I fully quit, thanks to all the students who worked on this, and thanks to everyone here for listening to me talk. And I'm happy to have a chat.
Alex, you did it? You there? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Adam. Applauses. So we do have several questions, right? Let me see.
Give me the easiest one.
I had a question, Adam. Can I start?
Yeah.
Alexi. All right. Well. Okay. So Omar, I think, had the first question. So I think let's go. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't see that.
Omar, are you here?
Yeah, I am.
Awesome.
Really nice talk. I learned a lot about phishing. So I wanted to ask, have you tried any solutions, or generally what are your thoughts on exploring client-side phishing detection mechanism? And what could be the biggest challenges that we need to address, like building that sort of a solution?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, so to be perfectly honest, it's something we actually have a research project looking on. I tried to focus here on the published stuff. But yeah, generally, I think where I think that's very important. So a lot of what we've talked about and what we've researched so far is like large scale phishing, right? Phishing in the large. I'm trying to get as many victims as possible, but as we've seen with the Podesta email breaches and all that stuff, if I want to phish, sorry. All right, I'm back. If I want to phish one user, right, with like a spear phishing or whatever kind of thing you want to do, I can bypass a lot of this whole ecosystem that we've talked about, right? And I think I don't think spear phishing is exactly the right word. I think of it as like micro phishing. Like we've seen phishing attacks where they, rather than target everyone on the internet, they're trying to impersonate a very specific regional bank. And so their cloaking is restricting it to only IP addresses that are geolocated in that area, right? Which makes it incredibly difficult for a security company to be able to detect that. So I think that's where I think the community has shifted away from client-side detection. I think that's one of the next frontiers of where to go is understanding current client-side detection and thinking about how can we improve it so that it actually is effective and protects people. But there's super complicated privacy aspects there that I think are fascinating for people to explore. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think just one more comment. I think it would probably help in the mobile space because, as you mentioned, that you cannot like put huge lists in the mobile. So maybe if you have automated mechanisms, that's probably preferable.
Exactly. Yep, I agree.
Just a quick follow-up to this question because it's super related. So is it also something related to the target of attack, right? If you're talking about like PayPal website, right? It's okay, you can detect like this usage of their JavaScript snippets and so on and so forth. What about if it's like a local bank, right, somewhere? And have you looked at such kind of cases with, I guess, fish time?
Yeah, we've seen it, but we haven't. I don't think we've fully investigated that. I think that'll be those phishing pockets, right? I think are maybe ponds is the right word, right? Of like targeted ponds that people are trying to fish in that are not the broad ponds that we're looking for. So yeah, I think that's, and then there's a lot of this stuff is about actually humans in the ecosystem working with each other, right? Of like, how do you, like that fundamental problem of I'm an organization, I found a phishing attack against me, but I can't do anything about it. I have to give it to Google or Microsoft and hope that they'll do something about it eventually, right? And that's, we're talking about some of the biggest companies in the world have that problem. Now think about that regional bank. How, A, are they ever going to detect it? But B, when they do, probably because their customers are affected, how do they, how do they get things addressed is a tricky problem for sure.
Cool. Yeah, for the sake of time, I believe we have like two related questions about web awesome, right? So either Sam or Giancarlo, if you wanted to ask it, or like just like your basically comments about web awesome and Fido too.
So sure, I'll ask it, Adam. Yeah, do you think that WebAuthn and FIDO2 are going to save us from this?
No, I don't know. I don't think anything is, to be perfectly honest. I think we need to keep doing everything we can, to be perfectly honest. It's just, phishers have shown the ability to be remarkably adaptable. So the kind of one thing I think about is, there's multi-factor authentication, right? Which I know Brad Reeves, I saw, is in the audience and posted a great dial-up sound or picture. But doing so we think, oh, two-factor authentication should solve the phishing problem, right? And it's like, well, actually, they find ways to get your second factor, right? If you're a high-value target, they'll do SIM jacking and try to get your SMS code that gets sent to you over SMS. I would never put down the ability of smart people whose livelihood depends on getting around your systems. I think it can help. And I think that's we should be moving towards things that will help the most amount of people. Yeah, that's kind of I don't know, maybe it's pessimistic or realist, or I don't know. Like, I hope that it does. And if it does, I will be super happy, and I'll be happy to move on to researching other things. There's lots of things in security.
Adam, quick, first one comment and then a question. The comment, so first of all, great talk. I like the historic perspective. It was nice. In terms of the comment, you talked about allowing notifications and headless browsers and so on. We actually built a headless browser that does that for you. Perfect. Like automatically. You just need to instrument the code and do that. But the question was about referrer policies, right? Mm-hmm. Because we have always this conflict between enabling, say, improving privacy on the browser side, but then the attackers can misuse that. And so I was wondering if you have noticed any abuse of the referrer policy suppression. Suppression of referrers through legitimately using referrer policies for images, for example, because you talked about including logos and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Adam Ost, do you want to talk about that? Have you seen any of that?
I'm sorry, I missed the question. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, so it's about referrer policies. So it seems like I posted the link before Ben's comment. I think a little bit up in the Slack with a link to the documentation basically for referrer policies. So you can declare a no refer on an image tag, and it should not, the browser should enforce that policy and not send the referrer to the site, to the server, I guess.
I wouldn't be surprised if we started seeing this. We've already actually been observing evasion techniques against this golden hour framework that was proposed, where attackers, when they redirect back to the legitimate website, they'll wrap it in like a bit.ly link, like a shortened link, so that you can no longer correlate with known malicious domains. So that's it's a very good call out, and these are the types of tactics I think that we can expect to see across phishing websites as they continue evolving.
That's the frustrating and exciting thing about the area, right? As soon as we come up with like a cool way to try to detect and get some visibility, they just cut it off. And then, like you said, that's funny, using privacy-focused features, which make a lot of sense. And you wouldn't want to not do that feature because of concerns of how phishers are going to use it. But yeah, that is fascinating.